According to my wife, I'm the only guy in our building who doesn't wear Italian shoes to take out the garbage. That's what she told her friends last Tuesday while I stood in our kitchen, pretending to read emails on my phone, but actually listening to every poisonous word that dripped from her perfectly glossed lips. My name is Orion Vanton, and I run a tech company that specializes in event management software. Nothing glamorous, but it pays for our luxury apartment overlooking the city and keeps my wife Faye in the designer clothes she thinks define her worth. What she doesn't realize is that my unglamorous business has taught me exactly how to make events disappear without a trace. Honestly, girls, Faye continued, her voice carrying that practiced tone she uses when she wants to sound both sympathetic and superior, my friends think he's not impressive enough. I should aim higher. The three women sitting in our living room, Tasha, Liv, and Elin, made those supportive noises that women make when they smell weakness in someone else's marriage. These were Faye's core group, her inner circle of judgment and gossip. Each one married to men who made more money than I did. Each one convinced that their husband's success made them somehow better than everyone else. You deserve so much more, Faye, Tasha said, adjusting her tennis bracelet. Remember when we talked about Grant at the office? Now there's a man with real ambition. Grant Huxley. Faye's boss at the marketing firm where she worked. Married, 42, drove a luxury SUV that cost more than most people's houses. I'd met him at company parties, watched him work the room with that practiced charm that screamed money and power. The way Faye's eyes lit up whenever his name came up told me everything I needed to know about where her thoughts had been wandering. Grant understands the finer things, Faye said, and I could hear the dreamy quality creeping into her voice. He knows what it means to live with class. I set my phone down on the counter, the soft click echoing in the sudden silence. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and I could see the calculation in each gaze. How much had I heard? How much did I know? Ladies, I said, walking into the living room with my hands in my pockets, don't let me interrupt your fascinating conversation about my apparent shortcomings. Faye's cheeks flushed pink, but she recovered quickly. Orion, we were just discussing how I'm not impressive enough for your refined tastes. I smiled, the expression feeling sharp on my face. How you should aim higher than the man who pays for this apartment, your car, and that designer purse you're clutching like a security blanket. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension and unspoken threats. Tasha cleared her throat and mumbled something about needing to leave. Liv and Elin followed suit, gathering their things with the practiced efficiency of women fleeing an uncomfortable situation. After they left, Faye turned to face me, her chin raised in defiance. You shouldn't have eavesdropped. In my own home? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Faye, let me make something crystal clear. If you think I'm not impressive enough, if you think you can do better, then by all means, go ahead and try. She blinked, clearly not expecting this response. Orion, I didn't mean... Oh, but you did mean it, every word. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that had once seemed romantic when we first moved here together. Your birthday party is in 2 weeks. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, all arranged through my connections, all paid for with my money. Since I'm apparently such an embarrassment, I'm sure you'll want to handle those arrangements yourself from now on. What are you talking about? I turned back to her, and she must have seen something in my expression that made her take a step backward. I'm talking about you getting exactly what you asked for, sweetheart. Independence. The chance to show everyone just how impressive you can be without my help. That night, while Faye slept beside me, I sat in my home office with my laptop open, methodically canceling every arrangement I'd made for her birthday celebration. The venue booking, canceled. The catering contract, terminated. The photographer, the florist, the string quartet she'd insisted on, all gone with a few keystrokes and some carefully worded emails. But that was just the beginning. My business had taught me the intricate web of connections that made high-end events possible. Vendors, suppliers, venues. They all knew each other, all talked to each other. A quiet word here, a subtle suggestion there, and doors that had once opened easily for Mrs. Orion Vanton would suddenly find reasons to remain closed. I opened a new document on my computer and began typing. If Faye wanted to play games with my reputation, then it was time she learned exactly what kind of opponent she'd chosen. The next morning, Faye's phone started ringing early. I listened from the kitchen as she took call after call, her voice growing more strained with each conversation. What do you mean the venue is double booked? She said into her phone, pacing back and forth in our bedroom. I confirmed that reservation weeks ago. I poured myself coffee and checked my own phone. My friend Drew, an ex-cop who now worked private security, had sent me a text. Got the info you wanted on Grant Huxley. Guy's got some interesting habits. Call me when you're ready to hear the details. Drew had been my roommate in college, the kind of loyal friend who'd help you move a body without asking questions. When I'd called him yesterday and asked for a background check on my wife's boss, he'd simply said, "How deep do you want me to dig?" The answer was, deep enough to bury him. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Faye emerged from the bedroom, her face pale and her hands shaking slightly. The catering company says they never received a deposit. The photographer claims his schedule is completely booked. Orion, I don't understand what's happening. That's strange, I said, not looking up from my phone. Maybe you should call Grant. I'm sure a man with his impressive connections could help you sort this out. The look she gave me was sharp with suspicion, but she couldn't prove anything. Not yet. Over the next 3 days, I watched my wife scramble to salvage her birthday party. She called in favors, begged friends for recommendations, even tried to book vendors from outside the city. But somehow, every lead turned into a disappointment. Every promising option fell through at the last minute. What she didn't know was that I'd spent years building relationships in the event industry. A word from me carried weight. When I suggested that a particular client might be difficult to work with, people listened. When I mentioned that someone had a history of payment issues, vendors suddenly found reasons to decline their business. On Thursday evening, Faye's best friend Maris called. I could hear both sides of the conversation from the kitchen where I was pretending to work on my laptop. "Faye, honey, I heard about the party troubles," Maris said, her voice syrupy with false sympathy. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "I don't know what's wrong," Faye said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "It's like every vendor in the city has suddenly decided they don't want my business." Maris made comforting noises, but I knew her well enough to recognize the calculating tone underneath. Maris had always been jealous of Faye's marriage to me, jealous of our apartment and our lifestyle. She'd be thrilled to watch her best friend's perfect life crumble. "Maybe," Maris said carefully, "this is the universe telling you something. About your priorities, I mean." "What do you mean?" "Well, you've been talking about how unhappy you are, about Grant, and how different your life could be. Maybe this is a sign that you should focus on what really matters." I closed my laptop and walked quietly toward the living room, staying just out of sight. "I can't just throw away my marriage," Faye said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why not? You said yourself that Orion doesn't appreciate you, that he's holding you back from the life you deserve." There it was, the confirmation I'd been waiting for. "Grant asked me to go away with him next weekend," Faye whispered, "to that resort in the mountains. He says his marriage is over anyway and that we could start fresh." My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to remain calm. This was perfect, better than I could have hoped for. "Oh, Faye," Maris breathed. "That sounds wonderful. You deserve to be with someone who truly values you." After Maris hung up, I retreated to my office and opened my laptop again. It was time to accelerate my timeline. I pulled up the financial records I'd been quietly gathering over the past few weeks. Faye thought she was clever, hiding her spending and her debts, but she'd underestimated my access to our accounts. The personal loans she'd taken out to buy designer clothes, the credit cards she'd opened in secret, the money she'd been slowly siphoning from our joint account to fund her lifestyle. All of it documented, all of it about to become very relevant. I picked up my phone and called Drew. "Ready for that conversation about Grant Huxley?" I asked when he answered. "More than ready. This guy's got more secrets than a government facility. Where do you want to meet?" "Your place. And Drew, bring everything you found. It's time to end this game." As I gathered my things to leave, Faye emerged from the bedroom, her eyes red from crying. "Orion," she said, her voice small and uncertain, "I think we need to talk." I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. "About what, sweetheart? About us? About our marriage? About whether we're both happy?" I turned to face her, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She looked so vulnerable, so lost. But then I remembered her words to her friends, her plans with Grant, her casual dismissal of everything I'd given her. "You're right," I said. "We do need to talk, but not tonight. I have some business to take care of first." "What kind of business?" I smiled, and this time I didn't bother to hide the coldness in it. "The impressive kind, Faye, the kind that might surprise you." Drew lived in a converted warehouse downtown, the kind of place that screamed ex-cop with trust issues from every reinforced window and security camera. When I arrived that evening, he was waiting with a thick folder and 2 cups of coffee that could strip paint. "Your boy Grant is a real piece of work," Drew said, sliding the folder across his kitchen table. Married 15 years, 2 kids in private school, and a wife who thinks he's working late when he's actually spending company money on hotel rooms. I opened the folder and started reading. Financial records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, even photographs taken with a telephoto lens. Drew had been thorough. He's been running the same game for years, Drew continued. Finds a vulnerable employee, usually someone younger or in a difficult marriage, and plays the successful mentor routine. Your wife isn't his first conquest, and she won't be his last. The photographs were particularly interesting. Grant entering a hotel with a woman who wasn't his wife. Grant having lunch with another woman at an expensive restaurant. Grant's hand on Faye's back as they walked into a downtown bar last week while I'd been in meetings. His wife doesn't know? I asked. She suspects, but she's got too much to lose to make waves. Big house, country club membership, social status. She's been looking the other way for years. I studied a photograph of Grant's wife, Linda. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from years of pretending everything was fine. I almost felt sorry for her. What about his finances? Drew grinned. That's where it gets interesting. He's been using company funds to finance his affairs. Fake business dinners, fictitious client meetings, even charging personal trips to the corporate account. I've got documentation going back 3 years. Enough to get him fired? Enough to get him prosecuted. But here's the really good part. His boss is a woman named Patricia Chen, and she's got a reputation for not tolerating this kind of behavior. One anonymous tip to HR, and your boy Grant will be updating his resume. I leaned back in my chair, processing the information. This was better than I'd hoped. Much better. There's something else, Drew said, pulling out another set of documents. I did some digging on your wife's financial situation. She's in deeper trouble than you might realize. He showed me loan documents, credit applications, even correspondence with debt collectors. Faye had been living beyond her means for months, borrowing money to maintain the lifestyle she thought she deserved. She owes almost $50,000 across various accounts, Drew said, and she's been using your credit rating as collateral without telling you. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just the affair, wasn't just the cruel words to her friends. She'd been systematically undermining our financial stability to fund her fantasy life. Drew, I said, my voice carefully controlled, I need you to do something else for me. Name it. I want you to buy her debt. He raised an eyebrow. Come again? The personal loans, the credit cards. I want you to purchase them through one of your shell companies. Can you do that? Drew was quiet for a long moment, then slowly smiled. You devious bastard. Yeah, I can do that. It'll take a few days to set up the paperwork, but it's doable. Good. And Drew, I want everything documented. Every transaction, every communication, every step of this process. When this is over, I want a paper trail that shows exactly who did what to whom. I drove home that night with Drew's folder on the passenger seat, my mind already working through the next phase of my plan. Faye was asleep when I got home, but her phone was charging on the nightstand, and she'd never been careful about her passwords. It took me less than 5 minutes to access her messages. The conversation thread with Grant made for fascinating reading. Grant, can't wait for this weekend. Finally get you all to myself. Faye, I'm nervous. What if Orion finds out? Grant, let me worry about your husband. After this weekend, you won't need to. Faye, what do you mean? Grant, I mean it's time you started living the life you deserve, with someone who can actually provide it. I screenshotted every message, every photo, every casual reference to their plans. Then I did something that would have made Drew proud. I forwarded everything to a secure email account I'd set up specifically for this purpose. The next morning, Faye was on the phone again, still trying to salvage her birthday party. I listened to her growing desperation as she called venue after venue, only to be told they were booked solid or that their prices had suddenly doubled. Maybe, I suggested over breakfast, you should just cancel the party altogether, have a quiet dinner instead. She looked at me with such fury that I thought she might throw her coffee mug. This party is important to me, Orion. It's my 40th birthday. 39th, I corrected. What? You're turning 39, not 40. Though I understand how easy it is to lose track when you're so focused on impressing other people. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm going to the office. Maybe Grant can help me figure out what's going wrong. I'm sure he can, I said mildly. Grant seems like the helpful type. After she left, I called Maris. Orion? She sounded surprised to hear from me. Is everything okay? That depends on your definition of okay, I said. Maris, I think you and I need to have a conversation about Faye. There was a long pause. What kind of conversation? The kind where we both stop pretending we don't know what's really going on. Can you meet me for coffee this afternoon? I don't think that's appropriate. Maris, I said, letting some steel creep into my voice. I know about Grant. I know about the weekend trip. I know about the things Faye has been saying about our marriage. The question is, do you want to be on the right side of this situation, or do you want to go down with her? Another pause, longer this time. Where do you want to meet? We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where conversations could be held without interruption. Maris looked nervous, fidgeting with her purse and avoiding eye contact. Before you say anything, she began, I want you to know that I tried to talk her out of it. Out of what, exactly? The affair, the lies, all of it. She finally looked at me, and I could see guilt written across her face. She's been unhappy for a long time, Orion. She feels like you don't appreciate her. So she decided to have an affair with her married boss and trash my reputation to anyone who would listen? Maris winced. It's not that simple. Actually, it is exactly that simple. I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the screenshots from Faye's messages. This is from last night. Your best friend planning to leave her husband for a man who's been cheating on his wife for years. She read the message, her face growing pale. Oh, Faye, what have you done? The better question is, what are you going to do about it? I put my phone away and leaned forward. Maris, I know you've been jealous of Faye's lifestyle. I know you've resented our marriage and our success. Here's your chance to stop being the sidekick in someone else's story. What do you want from me? Information, support, and when the time comes, honesty about what kind of person your best friend really is. She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup. Finally, she looked up at me. What are you planning to do? I'm planning to give Faye exactly what she says she wants. Independence, the chance to see how impressive she can be without my support. And Grant? I smiled. Grant is going to learn that actions have consequences, some of them more severe than others. That afternoon, I made a series of phone calls. The first was to Patricia Chen, Grant's boss. I didn't identify myself, simply said I was a concerned citizen with information about potential misuse of company funds. I promised to send documentation within the week. The second call was to a contact at the IRS. Grant's creative expense reporting had created some interesting tax implications that I thought they might find fascinating. The third call was to Linda Huxley, Grant's wife. Mrs. Huxley, I said when she answered, my name is Orion Vanton. I believe your husband works with my wife, Faye. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. There are some things I think you should know. By the time Faye came home that evening, the wheels were already in motion. She looked exhausted and defeated, her perfect composure finally cracking under the pressure. Any luck with the party planning? I asked. She shook her head. It's like there's some kind of conspiracy against me. Every vendor I call has some excuse. That's terrible, I said, managing to sound sympathetic. Maybe Grant had some suggestions? He's been trying to help, but he's dealing with his own problems at work. Something about an audit of his department's expenses. I nodded thoughtfully. Audits can be stressful. I hope everything works out for him. That night, as Faye slept beside me, I lay awake planning the next phase. The party was just the beginning. What came next would determine whether my wife learned from her mistakes or doubled down on her betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Drew. Debt purchase complete. You now own your wife's financial future? What's the next move? I typed back. Now we see how impressive she really is when she's playing by my rules. Linda Huxley was not what I expected. When we met at an upscale restaurant the next day, I found myself facing a woman who radiated quiet strength despite the weariness in her eyes. She was attractive in an understated way, with graying hair and laugh lines that spoke of better times. Mr. Vanton, she said, extending her hand, I have to admit, your call intrigued me. It's not often that someone contacts me about my husband's work relationships. We ordered coffee, and I spent a few minutes making small talk, studying her reactions. She was intelligent, observant, and clearly suspicious of my motives. Linda, I said finally, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve honesty. Your husband is having an affair with my wife. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, didn't show any of the reactions I might have expected. Instead, she simply nodded. I wondered when someone would finally say it out loud, she said. How long have you known? Definitively? A few days, suspected, longer than I care to admit. She stirred her coffee slowly, considering her words. Grant thinks he's very clever, you know. He thinks I don't notice the late nights, the mysterious business trips, the way he guards his phone like it contains state secrets. Why haven't you confronted him? Linda laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because I've been through this before. 3 times, actually. Grant has a pattern. He finds someone new and exciting, has his little adventure, then comes crawling back when reality sets in. And you take him back? I used to, for the sake of our children, for the sake of our life together. But this time feels different. She met my eyes. This time, he's talking about leaving, about starting fresh with someone who understands his ambitions. I pulled out my phone and showed her some of the messages between Grant and Faye. She read them without expression, though I noticed her grip tighten on her coffee cup. Your wife is quite confident, isn't she? Linda said, talking about the life she deserves, the man she's always wanted. She's about to learn some hard lessons about reality, I said. The question is, do you want to learn them together, or do you want to keep pretending everything is fine? Linda was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her own phone. I've been documenting Grant's activities for months, she said, showing me a folder full of photos, receipts, and screenshots. Bank statements, credit card bills, hotel charges. I even hired a private investigator. The evidence was damning. Grant had been more reckless than I'd realized, leaving a trail of financial and personal indiscretions that would destroy him if it ever became public. What do you want to do with this information? I asked. I want my husband to face consequences for once in his life. Real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist and a promise to do better. We spent the next hour coordinating our approach. Linda would continue gathering evidence while I worked on exposing the affair. When the time came for the final confrontation, we would present a united front. There's something else, Linda said as we prepared to leave. Grant has been promising your wife things he can't deliver. He's told her about his salary, his prospects, his financial situation. Most of it is lies. What do you mean? Grant's department is underperforming. He's been on thin ice at work for months, and his spending habits have put us in serious debt. The man your wife thinks is going to give her a better life can barely maintain the one he has. This information added a delicious irony to the situation. Faye was planning to leave me for a man whose life was even more precarious than she realized. That evening, Faye came home with news that made my day complete. I had lunch with Maris today, she said, settling onto the couch with a glass of wine. She said the strangest thing. Oh, what was that? She asked me if I was sure about Grant, if I really knew him as well as I thought I did. I looked up from my laptop, feigning mild interest. That's an odd thing for a friend to say. That's what I thought. But then she started asking questions about his financial situation, his marriage, his plans for the future. It was almost like she was trying to warn me about something. Maris had clearly taken our conversation to heart. Good. I needed allies in Faye's social circle, and her best friend was the perfect place to start. Maybe she's just concerned about you, I suggested. Ending a marriage is a big step. She wants to make sure you're making the right choice. Faye shot me a sharp look. What makes you think I'm ending our marriage? Aren't you? I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention. The secret phone calls, the mysterious weekend plans, the constant criticism of everything I do. It doesn't take a detective to figure out where this is heading. She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. We stared at each other across the living room, the pretense finally dropping away. I haven't been happy for a long time, she said finally. So I gathered. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I'm going away this weekend, with Grant, to figure things out. I nodded, as if this was perfectly reasonable. That sounds like a good idea. Sometimes you need distance to gain perspective. She blinked, clearly not expecting this response. You're not going to fight for us? Faye, I said gently, you can't fight for someone who's already decided to leave. All I can do is make sure you have all the information you need to make an informed decision. What kind of information? I opened my laptop again and turned the screen toward her. On it was a financial summary I'd prepared, showing our joint assets, debts, and the implications of a potential divorce. For instance, I said, did you know that the personal loans you've taken out are secured against our joint assets? If we divorce, those debts become part of the settlement calculation. Her face went pale as she read the numbers. I didn't realize, or that your affair with Grant constitutes adultery under state law, which affects spousal support calculations. How did you... Or that Grant's been lying to you about his financial situation. His department is failing, his marriage is already over in all but name, and he's been using company money to fund your relationship. Faye stared at the screen, her wine glass forgotten in her hand. That's not true, Grant said. Grant says a lot of things. The question is, how much of it is actually true? I showed her the documentation Linda had shared, the evidence of Grant's pattern of affairs, his financial problems, his history of making promises he couldn't keep. "This is from his wife," I said. "Linda Huxley, lovely woman. We had coffee yesterday." Faye's face went through several shades of pale before settling on a sickly green. "You talked to his wife?" We compared notes. Turns out we have a lot in common. Spouses who lie, who cheat, who think the grass is greener somewhere else. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "I need to think." "Take all the time you need," I said. "But Faye, when you make your decision, make sure it's based on reality, not fantasy." The next morning, Faye was on the phone with Grant, her voice tight with anxiety. I could only hear her side of the conversation, but it was enough. "Grant, we need to talk about some things before this weekend," she said. "About your financial situation, about your marriage, about what you've been telling me." There was a long pause, then her voice rose. "What do you mean it's complicated? You said you were getting divorced. You said you had money saved." Another pause, longer this time. "No, Grant, I don't think I'm overreacting. I think I'm finally asking the right questions." She hung up and turned to find me watching from the kitchen doorway. "Problems in paradise?" I asked. "He says you've been spreading lies about him, trying to sabotage our relationship. Have I said anything that isn't true?" She couldn't answer that, and we both knew it. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Patricia Chen, Grant's boss. "Mr. Vanton," she said, "I received some very interesting documentation about one of my employees. I wanted to thank you for bringing this to my attention." "I'm just a concerned citizen," I said. "I believe in accountability." "So do I. Mr. Huxley will be meeting with HR on Monday morning. I suspect it will be his final meeting with this company." Friday evening, Faye packed a bag for her weekend with Grant. She moved slowly, without her usual enthusiasm, clearly troubled by our recent conversations. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, leaning against the bedroom doorway. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not sure about anything anymore." "Then maybe you should stay home. Work on being sure before you make decisions you can't take back." She looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time in months. "When did you become so calm about all this?" she asked. I smiled. "When I realized that fighting for someone who doesn't want to be fought for is a waste of energy. Now I'm focused on protecting myself and making sure everyone gets what they actually deserve." She left an hour later, her weekend bag in hand and doubt written across her face. I watched from the window as Grant picked her up in his luxury SUV, noting the way he avoided looking up at our apartment. As soon as they were gone, I made a series of phone calls. By Monday morning, Grant Huxley's carefully constructed life would begin to crumble, and Faye would learn exactly what kind of man she'd chosen over her husband. The weekend stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities and plans. I had work to do, pieces to move, consequences to arrange. It was going to be a very interesting Monday. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharp and clear. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when my phone rang. Faye's name appeared on the screen, and I could hear traffic noise in the background when I answered. "Orion," she said, her voice strained. "Something terrible has happened." "What kind of terrible?" "Grant's been fired. They called him into HR this morning and just let him go. No explanation, no severance, nothing." I made sympathetic noises while internally celebrating. Patricia Chen had moved faster than I'd expected. "That's awful," I said. "Did they give him any reason?" "Something about misuse of company funds and violation of ethics policies. Grant says it's all a misunderstanding, but they wouldn't even let him clear out his desk." "Where are you now?" "Driving back to the city. He's not handling this well. He's talking about lawsuits and conspiracies, saying someone set him up." "Someone like who?" There was a pause. "He thinks it might have been you." I laughed, and it sounded genuine even to my own ears. "Me? Faye, I run an event management company. What possible influence would I have over Grant's employer?" "That's what I told him, but he's convinced that you've been working against us somehow." "Well," I said thoughtfully, "I suppose paranoia is a natural response to having your life fall apart. People need someone to blame." "Orion," she said quietly, "I think I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "This whole thing. The affair, the lies, the way I've been treating you. Grant isn't the man I thought he was." I waited, letting her continue. "He spent the entire weekend talking about money, about how he was going to get back at his company, how he deserved better, how everyone was against him, and when the news came this morning, he completely fell apart, started drinking at 10 a.m. and hasn't stopped." That doesn't sound like the impressive, successful man you described to your friends. No, she said, her voice small. It doesn't. Faye, I said gently, why don't you come home? We can talk about this properly. I want to, but Grant he's not letting me leave. He says we need to stick together, that we're all each other has now. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean he's not letting you leave? He took my car keys, says he's protecting me from making another mistake. Orion, I'm scared. I was already reaching for my own keys. Where are you? She gave me the address of Grant's house, a McMansion in an upscale suburb that I now knew he could barely afford. I'm coming to get you, I said. Stay on the phone with me. The drive took 20 minutes, during which Faye described Grant's increasingly erratic behavior. He'd been drinking steadily, ranting about conspiracies and betrayals, alternating between rage and self-pity. He keeps saying that I owe him, she said, that he sacrificed his marriage for me, and now I can't abandon him when things get difficult. Faye, listen to me carefully. You don't owe him anything. What he did to his marriage, he did by choice. You're not responsible for the consequences. When I arrived at Grant's house, I could see Faye's silhouette in the front window. She was pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear. I can see you, I told her. I'm coming to the door. Grant answered my knock, and I was shocked by his appearance. The confident, polished executive I'd met at company parties was gone, replaced by a disheveled man with red eyes and alcohol on his breath. Well, well, he said, swaying slightly, if it isn't the devoted husband coming to rescue his cheating wife. Hello, Grant, I said calmly. I'm here to pick up Faye. She's not going anywhere. We have things to discuss. Actually, she's free to leave whenever she wants. That's how these things work. He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. You think you're pretty clever, don't you? Getting me fired, ruining my life, stealing my woman. I didn't steal anything that wasn't already being given away freely, I said. And as for your job, well, maybe you should have thought about consequences before you started misusing company funds. His face flushed red. You can't prove anything. I don't need to. Your former employer seems to have found plenty of evidence on their own. Faye appeared behind him, her face pale and her hands shaking. Grant, please, just let me go home. Home? He turned on her, his voice rising. You said I was your home now. You said you wanted to build a life with me. I was wrong, she said quietly. I made a mistake, and I'm sorry, but I can't fix your problems by staying here. Grant's expression turned ugly. You're just like all the others. When things get tough, you run back to safety. That's enough, I said, stepping between them. Faye, get your things. We're leaving. You don't get to make that decision, Grant snarled, grabbing my arm. I looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. Grant, you have about 3 seconds to let go of me before this situation becomes much more complicated than it needs to be. Something in my voice must have gotten through to him because he released my arm and stepped back. This isn't over, he said. Actually, it is. Your relationship with my wife is finished, your career is finished, and if you continue to make threats, your freedom might be finished too. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. I've been recording this conversation. Unlawful detention, verbal threats, intimidation. These are serious charges, Grant. Do you really want to add them to your current list of problems? While he processed this information, Faye gathered her things and we headed for the door. You'll regret this, Grant called after us. Both of you. I turned back to him one last time. Grant, let me give you some free advice. When you're in a hole, stop digging. Focus on cleaning up the mess you've made instead of making it worse. The drive home was quiet. Faye stared out the window, lost in thought, while I processed what had just happened. Grant's behavior had been more extreme than I'd anticipated, which meant he was more dangerous than I'd realized. Orion, Faye said finally, I need to tell you something. I'm listening. I accessed our joint accounts last week. I transferred money to help Grant with some expenses. I pulled over to the side of the road and turned to face her. How much money? $20,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $20,000 of our money given to her lover to help fund their affair. Faye, I said, my voice carefully controlled, do you understand what you've done? I thought I was helping someone I cared about. I thought we were building a future together. You stole from our marriage to fund its destruction. She started crying then, the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that came from genuine remorse. But remorse wouldn't fix what she'd broken. I want to make this right, she said. I'll do whatever it takes. I started the car again and pulled back into traffic. We'll see. That evening, while Faye slept off the emotional exhaustion of the day, I sat in my office making plans. Grant's erratic behavior had accelerated my timeline, but it had also given me new opportunities. I called Drew and filled him in on the day's events. "This guy sounds unstable," Drew said. "You might want to consider a restraining order." "Not yet. I want to see how far he's willing to go first." "That's dangerous thinking, Orion. Desperate people do stupid things." "Exactly. And when Grant does something stupid, I want to be ready to document it." The next morning brought news that made everything clear. Linda Huxley called to tell me that Grant had been arrested for driving under the influence the night before. "He was pulled over 3 blocks from his house," she said. Apparently, he'd been driving around the neighborhood for hours, drinking and ranting about conspiracies. "Is he still in custody?" "For now. But Orion, there's something else. The police found your address written on a piece of paper in his car, along with some very disturbing notes about getting revenge. The pieces were falling into place perfectly. Grant's desperation was making him reckless, and reckless people made mistakes that could be used against them." "Linda," I said, "I think it's time we move to the final phase of this situation." "What did you have in mind?" "A meeting, all of us together. Time to put all the cards on the table." That afternoon, I made a series of phone calls. To Maris, who agreed to help arrange a gathering of Faye's friends. To Patricia Chen, who confirmed that Grant's termination was permanent and that criminal charges were being considered. To my lawyer, who began preparing the paperwork for what was coming next. By evening, everything was in place. The stage was set for the final confrontation, the moment when all the lies and betrayals would be exposed and everyone would face the consequences of their choices. Faye was about to learn exactly how impressive her husband could be when properly motivated, and Grant was about to discover that actions have consequences, especially when those actions are documented and witnessed by people who matter. The game was almost over. It was time to reveal the final score. The meeting was set for Thursday evening at our apartment. I'd spent the week making preparations, turning our living room into what Drew called a courtroom without the judge. Documents were organized in neat folders, my laptop was connected to the large screen TV, and I'd even arranged for light refreshments, because nothing says civilized confrontation like cheese and crackers. The guest list was carefully curated. Faye, obviously. Maris, who had become my unlikely ally. Linda Huxley, who deserved to see her husband's lies exposed. Grant himself, who I'd invited through Linda with the promise that this was his chance to set the record straight. And finally, Tasha, Liv, and Elin, Faye's inner circle of gossips, who I knew would spread whatever happened here throughout their social network. Grant arrived first, which surprised me. He looked better than he had on Monday, showered, shaved, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But his eyes held the desperate gleam of a man who knew he was cornered. "Orion," he said, extending his hand as if we were old friends. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I think there's been some misunderstandings that we can clear up." I shook his hand, noting the slight tremor in his grip. "I'm always interested in clarity, Grant." Linda arrived next, and the temperature in the room dropped noticeably when Grant saw her. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. "Linda is here because she's been part of this situation from the beginning," I said. "She deserves to hear the truth." "What truth? That my marriage was already over? That Linda and I have been living separate lives for years?" Linda laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Grant, we had dinner together last Tuesday. We went to our son's soccer game on Saturday. We've been sleeping in the same bed for 15 years. If that's living separate lives, you have a very creative definition of separation." Before Grant could respond, the others began arriving. Faye looked nervous, constantly glancing between Grant and me as if trying to figure out which side of the room was safer. Maris brought wine, which she set on the kitchen counter before taking a seat that gave her a clear view of everyone. Tasha, Liv, and Elin clustered together on the couch, whispering among themselves and clearly thrilled to be witnessing what promised to be spectacular drama. "Now that everyone's here," I said, standing near the TV screen, "I thought we should have an honest conversation about recent events, about truth, consequences, and the importance of making informed decisions." I clicked a button on my laptop, and the first slide appeared on the screen. A timeline of the past month, starting with Faye's cruel comments to her friends and ending with Grant's arrest for driving under the influence. "Let's begin with some basic facts," I said, my voice calm and professional. 3 weeks ago, my wife told her friends that I wasn't impressive enough for her, that she should aim higher. She was having an affair with Grant Huxley, a married man who had convinced her that he was financially successful and emotionally available. Grant started to object, but I held up a hand. "Please, let me finish, then everyone will have a chance to respond." The next slide showed financial records, Grant's company expenses, personal debts, and the loans he'd taken against his house. Grant presented himself as a successful executive with unlimited prospects. In reality, his department was failing, he was under investigation for misuse of company funds, and his personal finances were in chaos. Linda nodded grimly. I tried to tell him we were spending too much, but he always said not to worry, that he had everything under control. The affair itself was funded largely through fraudulent expense reports, I continued, showing hotel receipts and restaurant bills that had been charged to Grant's corporate account. Romantic dinners, weekend getaways, even gifts, all paid for with his employer's money. Faye's face was growing paler with each revelation. Grant, you told me those were legitimate business expenses. They were business expenses, Grant said desperately. Building relationships, networking, client development? With your subordinate, I asked. At romantic restaurants? In hotel rooms? The next slide was a screenshot of text messages between Grant and Faye, including explicit discussions of their physical relationship and plans to leave their respective spouses. These messages were sent using company phones during company time, I said, another violation of corporate policy. Tasha leaned forward, studying the screen. Faye, you actually wrote that? About Orion being financially adequate but emotionally vacant? Faye couldn't meet her eyes. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. Did you mean it when you transferred $20,000 from your joint account to Grant's personal account? I asked, bringing up the next slide. The room erupted. Maris gasped audibly. Linda's mouth fell open, and even Grant's supporters, if he had any left, looked shocked. You gave him our money? Maris asked. Faye, how could you? I thought I was helping someone I loved, Faye said, tears starting to flow. I thought we were building something together. You were building something, I agreed, a foundation of lies, theft, and betrayal. Grant finally found his voice. This is all very dramatic, Orion, but you are missing the bigger picture. Faye and I have real feelings for each other. Yes, mistakes were made, but love isn't always convenient or neat. Love? Linda stood up, her composure finally cracking. Grant, you told me the same thing about Sarah 3 years ago, and Jennifer before that, and Rebecca before that. You don't love these women. You collect them like trophies until you get bored and move on to the next one. She pulled out her own folder, thick with documentation. Should I tell them about the credit cards you opened in my name? The loans you took against our house without telling me? The college funds you emptied to pay for your affairs? Grant's face went white. Linda, that's private. Nothing is private anymore, she shouted. You destroyed our privacy when you decided to live a double life. I clicked to the next slide, showing Grant's arrest record from the previous week. This brings us to recent events, I said. When Grant's carefully constructed lies began to collapse, his response was to drink heavily and drive around our neighborhood while making threats. I showed the police report, including the notes they'd found in his car. Make them pay, I read aloud. Orion thinks he's so smart. Faye will regret choosing him. These are direct quotes from handwritten notes found in Grant's possession during his arrest. The room was completely silent now. Even the gossip trio had stopped whispering. Grant, I said, turning to face him directly, would you like to explain what you meant by make them pay? He looked around the room, seeing the disgust and fear in every face, and seemed to realize that his situation was hopeless. I was drunk, he said finally. I was angry and drunk and not thinking clearly. You were making threats against my wife and me, I corrected. Threats that were taken seriously enough by the police to recommend restraining orders. I clicked to the final slide, which showed a legal document. Which brings us to the purpose of tonight's meeting, I said. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing for divorce. The grounds are adultery, financial misconduct, and irreconcilable differences. I'm also filing a civil suit against Grant for alienation of affection and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Faye looked stricken. Orion, please. Additionally, I continued, I've purchased all of Faye's outstanding debts through a third party. The personal loans, credit cards, and other obligations she incurred while funding her fantasy life are now my property. I can call them in at any time. You can't do that, Grant said. Actually, I can. It's all perfectly legal. Drew, would you like to explain the process? Drew stepped out of the kitchen, where he'd been quietly observing. Debt purchasing is a common business practice. When someone defaults on a loan, the creditor can sell that debt to a third party for collection. Orion now owns approximately $50,000 of his wife's debt, which means he controls the payment terms. What does that mean for me? Faye asked. It means, I said, that your financial future depends entirely on my goodwill. If I choose to be generous, you might have reasonable payment terms. If I choose to be vindictive, I could demand immediate payment in full. The implications sank in slowly. Faye would be financially ruined without my cooperation. Grant was facing criminal charges and civil lawsuits. Their affair had cost them everything and gained them nothing. There is one alternative, I said. Faye, you can contest the divorce. Fight for half of our assets, claim that your affair was justified by marital problems, argue that you deserve spousal support. Hope flickered in her eyes. Of course, I continued. That would mean a public trial. Everything we've discussed tonight would become part of the court record. Your friends, your family, your co-workers. Everyone would know exactly what you did and why. The hope died quickly. Or, I said, you can sign an agreement I've had prepared. You keep your personal belongings, your car, and a modest settlement. In return, you agree not to contest the divorce or make any claims against my business or future earnings. I handed her a folder. You have 24 hours to decide. Grant stood up abruptly. This is insane. You can't just destroy people's lives because your feelings were hurt. I'm not destroying anything, I said calmly. I'm simply revealing what was already broken. The lies, the theft, the betrayal. Those were your choices, not mine. You orchestrated this whole thing. You set us up. I documented your behavior and allowed natural consequences to unfold. If you hadn't been stealing from your company, you wouldn't have been fired. If you hadn't been making threats, you wouldn't have been arrested. If you hadn't been lying to everyone, you wouldn't be facing the truth now. Linda gathered her things. Grant, I'll be staying at my sister's house. The divorce papers will be served tomorrow. Linda, wait. 15 years, she said, turning back to him. 15 years I wasted believing your promises and excuses. I'm done. She left without another word. Tasha, Liv, and Elin followed quickly, clearly eager to spread the news of what they'd witnessed. Maris lingered long enough to squeeze Faye's shoulder sympathetically, but even she couldn't find words of comfort. Finally, only Grant, Faye, and I remained. This isn't over, Grant said, but his voice lacked conviction. Yes, it is, I replied. Your career is over, your marriage is over, and your relationship with my wife is over. The only question now is whether you're going to accept reality or continue making things worse for yourself. He looked at Faye one last time, perhaps hoping for some sign that she would stand by him. But she was staring at the floor, tears streaming down her face, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd lost. Grant left without another word. Orion, Faye said quietly. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but is there any chance? No, I said, not unkindly. There isn't. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't impressive enough for you. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. She nodded, accepting the finality in my voice. The agreement is fair, I said. More than fair, considering what you've done. I suggest you take it. As she gathered her things to leave, she would be staying with Maris while she decided what to do, I felt a strange sense of completion. The game was over. The score was settled. Standing alone in my apartment, looking out at the city lights that had once seemed romantic, I realized that I felt lighter, somehow. Free from the weight of pretense, free from the burden of fighting for someone who didn't want to be fought for. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and paperwork and the formal dissolution of my marriage. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Impressive enough, after all. The next morning brought autumn rain, the kind that washes the city clean and makes everything look sharp and new. I stood at my kitchen window, drinking coffee and watching the world wake up below when my phone rang. It was my lawyer, confirming that all the paperwork had been filed and that Faye had indeed signed the settlement agreement at 6 a.m., just hours after our confrontation. She didn't even ask for time to review it with her own attorney, he said. Just signed everything and asked when she could pick up her personal belongings. What about Grant? His lawyer called this morning. They want to discuss a settlement for the civil suit. Apparently he's eager to avoid a public trial. I smiled. Tell them we'll consider reasonable offers, but we're in no hurry. After hanging up, I called Drew. It's over, I told him. How do you feel? I considered the question. Satisfied, tired, ready to move on. Any regrets? About the marriage ending? No. About the way it ended? Also no. Some people only learn through consequences, and some people never learn at all. That afternoon, I was working in my office when the building's doorman called to tell me that Faye was in the lobby, asking permission to collect her things. Send her up, I said. She arrived with Maris and 2 moving boxes, looking smaller somehow than she had the night before. The defiance was gone, replaced by a hollow acceptance that made her seem fragile. I'll just get my clothes and personal items, she said quietly. I won't take anything that belongs to both of us. I nodded and returned to my work while she packed. Maris helped her, shooting occasional glances in my direction that I pretended not to notice. Orion, Faye said as they prepared to leave. I want you to know that I understand now. What I threw away, I mean. You were a good husband, and I was too blind to see it. Thank you for saying that, I replied. But understanding what you lost doesn't change the fact that you chose to lose it? She nodded, tears starting again. I know. I needed you to know that I know. After they left, I walked through the apartment, noting the empty spaces where her things had been. The closet looked sparse without her clothes. The bathroom counter seemed too clean without her cosmetics scattered across it. But instead of feeling sad, I felt relieved. The pretense was finally over. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda Huxley. Wanted you to know that Grant was served with divorce papers this morning. He didn't take it well, but he signed them. Thank you for helping me find the courage to end this charade. I texted back, thank you for being willing to face the truth. I hope your future is everything you deserve. That evening, Drew stopped by with Chinese takeout and beer. So, he said, settling onto my couch, what's next for the newly single Orion Vanton? Honestly, I have no idea. For the first time in years, I get to make decisions based on what I want instead of what someone else thinks I should want. Any thoughts on dating? I laughed. Drew, I just finished documenting every detail of my wife's affair and orchestrating the downfall of her lover. I think I need some time to remember how to trust people again. Fair enough. But when you're ready, there are plenty of women out there who would appreciate a man who pays attention to details. We ate in comfortable silence, watching the rain streak down the windows. My phone buzzed occasionally with messages, updates from my lawyer, a few texts from friends who had heard about the divorce, even a message from Patricia Chen thanking me for the information that had helped clean up her company. But no messages from Faye, no attempts at reconciliation or pleas for another chance. She had accepted the consequences of her choices with a grace I hadn't expected from her. Around 10 o'clock, Drew's phone rang. He answered it with a frown. You're sure? He said. Okay, I'll tell him. He hung up and turned to me. That was my contact at the police department. Grant Huxley was arrested again tonight. For what? Public intoxication and disturbing the peace. Apparently he was outside Linda's sister's house, shouting about conspiracies and demanding to talk to his wife. I shook my head. Some people never learn? The arresting officer said he was completely incoherent, talking about how everyone was against him, how his life had been destroyed by jealous people, how he was the real victim in all this. What happens now? Probably a night in jail, then a court appearance. Between this and the previous arrest, he's looking at some serious consequences. I felt a moment of something that might have been pity. Grant had destroyed his own life through a series of selfish choices, but watching someone's complete collapse was never entirely satisfying. Drew, I said, make sure Linda knows what happened. She might want to take extra security precautions. Already done. I also recommended she get a restraining order. After Drew left, I stood on my balcony looking out at the city. The rain had stopped, and the streets below gleamed wetly under the streetlights. Somewhere out there, Faye was probably crying herself to sleep in Maris's guest room, finally understanding the full cost of her choices. Grant was sitting in a jail cell, still refusing to accept responsibility for his actions. Linda was starting over at 45, free but uncertain about her future. And I was here, alone but not lonely, planning a future that belonged entirely to me. My phone rang one last time. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Mr. Vanton? This is Jennifer Walsh from Metropolitan Magazine. I'm calling about a story we're working on regarding corporate misconduct and its impact on families. I understand you were instrumental in exposing some fraudulent activities at Huxley's former company. I considered hanging up, but something in her voice made me pause. What kind of story? I asked. We're looking at how financial fraud affects not just companies, but the families and communities connected to the perpetrators. Your situation, the way you uncovered and documented the misconduct, it's exactly the kind of accountability we want to highlight. I'm not interested in publicity, I said. I understand, but Mr. Vanton, your story could help other people recognize the warning signs of financial infidelity and corporate fraud. You could prevent other families from going through what you've experienced. I walked back inside, considering her words. There was something appealing about the idea of turning my painful experience into something that could help others. If I agreed to talk to you, I said, it would be on condition that you focus on the patterns of behavior and the importance of documentation, not on the personal drama. Absolutely. We're interested in the educational value, not the gossip. Then yes, I'll talk to you, but not tonight. Call me next week, and we'll set up a time. After hanging up, I realized that I was smiling. For the first time since this whole mess began, I was thinking about the future instead of the past. I opened my laptop and began typing, starting with a simple sentence. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. It was going to be a long article, but I had time now. Time to think, time to write, time to build something new from the wreckage of what had been destroyed. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility. Inside, I was finally free to discover who I was when I wasn't busy being disappointed by someone else. The game was over. The score was settled. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow. The rain had washed everything clean, and I was ready to start again.